short prayers we give one another. But we must, of course, take heed that those don't degenerate into a formality, so that we do not take the name of the Lord in vain. Think about what you're saying. Mean it when you say it. Now, in verse 15, he takes an account of his reapers concerning this stranger met with in the field. He gave necessary orders concerning her not to touch her, in verse 9, nor to reproach her, in verse 15. The master is taking care that not only he himself, but those that work under him and for him don't do anyone any hurt. He orders them to be kind to her, let fall some of the handfuls on purpose for her. Here masters should restrain and rebuke servants' wastefulness, certainly, but they should not bind them from being charitable. Boaz is very kind to Ruth, shows her favor. He has an account of her that is good. He's observed her and her humility and her hard work. And this inclines his heart toward charity toward her. Now, there's a particular account of what passes concerning her here. The steward gives Boaz the good word about Ruth, recommends her to his favor, verse 6 and 7. She's a stranger, meaning that she's one of those that by the law of God will gather in the gleanings of the harvest. She's a Moabite, and therefore a wanderer in this land away from her people. And so in Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10 we read, "And when ye reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corn of the field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God." This is the way God's people take care of that problem. Person from the foreign land comes in, there's going to be gleanings in the vineyard and in the field. They're waiting for them. Now, she's also allied to his family. She came back with Naomi, the wife of Elimelech, a kinsman of Boaz. She's also a proselyte. She came out of the country of Moab to settle in the land of Israel. And that she's very modest. She didn't glean until she asked leave to do so. He sees her industriousness, of course, working from morning till evening. And so Boaz is civil to her. He orders her to attend the reapers in every field they gather, and not glean in the field of another, setting himself to seeing to her upkeep there. He shouldn't need to go anywhere else to better herself. He is a very rich man, has plenty of fields. In verse 8. He tells his servants to be respectful and tender to her. And no doubt they will be, especially when they see their master kind to her. He orders her not only to drink the water that was drawn up for his servants, but at mealtime to come and eat their bread. There in verses 9 and 14. And when the reapers sat down to eat, he reached her some parched corn, him also being there to eat with them. There is no shame in the finest hand around reaching out to serve the needy. He, being an Israelite and a true follower of God, knows this. He wasn't stingy in providing for his reapers. He sent them more than enough for themselves and enough to entertain the stranger there as well. In Proverbs 11 and verse 24, we start to read, "There is that scattereth, and yet increaseth. And there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered himself." And Boaz is a great example of this. He has a liberal hand. He scatters his wealth, and he has become a mighty man of wealth thereby. Now, Boaz, in speaking to her particularly, compliments her for her duty in respect to her mother-in-law, of which he had heard in verse 11, and especially for that she had left her own country and had become a proselyte to the religion of the one true God. If those who leave everything they have in order to embrace true worship are greatly worthy of double honor. He also prayed for her in verse 12. "The Lord recompense thy work," he says. Now, her strong affection to the Commonwealth of Israel, which she was a stranger to, was a work of divine grace. We are drawn to the Lord by his Spirit. She and not her sister responded to that, and no doubt to the good teaching of Naomi, her mother-in-law. That work of divine grace is certainly going to be given a full reward by the Lord under whose wings she had come to trust, as Boaz says. And so here again we see the Lord guiding her steps. The Lord kindling that faith in her heart. The Lord bringing her into society and getting her to meet the right people that she needed at the right time. And then when she is faithful to the Lord in enjoying his grace to her, she will be rewarded for the faith that he gave her. That's a pretty good deal. Now, Ruth, for her part, is humble and shows great gratitude in receiving the favor she does. She pays all respect to Boaz, gives him honor, fell on her face, bowed herself to the ground in verse 10. She sees herself as unworthy of his favor. "I am but a stranger," she says, "not like one of his handmaids." And she acknowledges his kindness to her. Now, his kindness is not much more than what is actually obliged in the law, but she admires it and compliments it. "Why have I found grace in thine eyes?" she says in verse 10. And she asks his goodwill continue. "Let me find favor in thy sight," she says. In verse 13, "Thou hast comforted me, for thou hast spoken friendly to me." Those that are great in high places, like Boaz, sometimes don't know just how much they can do for those under them by simply being kind and friendly to them. There's not much expense in that. We shouldn't begrudge it to anyone. Boaz then gives her dinner with his reapers, and she eats then only so much as suffices her, it says, and immediately rose up to glean in verse 14 and 15. She didn't use her great labor or her hunger as an excuse to eat so much that would make her unfit for further work in the afternoon. She was ready to go out and glean more, satisfied, but not stuffing herself. Her humility and gratitude impressing everyone. Now, that brings us to verse 17, all the way through to 23 at the end of the chapter, when she finishes her day's work. Starting in verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up, and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth, and gave to her, and she had reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, This man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, The man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. And Ruth the Boamite said, He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men, until they have ended all my harvest. And Naomi said unto Ruth her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz, to glean unto the end of the barley harvest, and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. So she finishes her day's work. She doesn't lose any time. She gleans until evening. She's not weary of well-doing, because it's the season. We should as well work for him who sent us while the day still shines. She didn't lose what she gleaned. She thrust it herself. It's hard to say, but she might easily carry it home that way and have it ready for use. Put it all together at about an ephah, all together there. That's about a bushel. Many little bits for a day can make a great deal altogether. And then she paid respects to her mother-in-law, went straight home to her, didn't go and converse with Boaz's servants or hang out afterwards. She entertains her with what she has left of the dinner Boaz had given her, that which she had reserved after she was sufficed, there in verse 18, referring back to verse 14. In 1 Timothy, in chapter 5, starting in verse 4, the apostle writes, But if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Again, what we bring into the temple and those prayers we say on the street corner don't mean nearly as much to our Lord as what we do for those close at hand and those who are our mothers and our relatives that we owe the most to. That piety at home, which is good and acceptable before God. How we treat our brothers close by, as opposed to what we bring into the temple far off. Now, she gives her an account of her day's work and how kind Providence had been to her, Naomi asked where she was. Parents probably ought to know where their kids have been, not to discourage them, but to commend them when they've done well and correct them if they make a mistake. And Ruth gives her an account of the kindness she received from Boaz, the hope she had of further kindness from him. And Ruth tells her mother that she might take some occasion or another to acknowledge it. So mom might thank him. And also, she left out the part where Boaz had commended her so much. She is not quick to talk herself up and how he'd complimented her, but is quick to compliment him for what he'd done. And then what Naomi said to Ruth about it. She prayed for him that had been her daughter's benefactor, even before she knew who it was. The poor here should pray for those who are kind and liberal with them. When the poor are unable to give anything else back, we can give our prayers.